Hello everyone, it's Wednesday and you're watching Within the Frame. I'm Kim Bo-kyung. The night before the Korean War broke out, this is how North Korea is portraying the current peninsula tensions, saying Seoul and Washington are pushing the unstable situation closer to the brink of a nuclear war. North Korea has vowed to expand its own defensive capabilities. However, the situation within the regime is said to be dire. It is seeing severe food shortages and monsoon season is making things even worse. For an in-depth analysis of the reclusive regime and its latest developments, we invite Professor Kim Young-jun from the Korea National Defense University and Dr. Mark Berry, Associate Editor Emeritus of the International Journal on World Peace. Now, first question to our Professor Kim. Sunday was the 73rd anniversary of the start of the Korean War, and Pyongyang said current military tensions in the region are similar to those on the night before the outbreak of the war. How is North Korea seeing the tension on the peninsula?
Yeah, thank you for having me today. Now the Iraq-U.S. alliance is strongest ever, and trilateral security partnership between the U.S. and Iraq and Japan is very strong. So that's why North Korea is very nervous and has blamed this kind of situation. But the fundamental problem for this kind of military tension is North Korea nuclear missile threat rather than Iraq-U.S. alliance. So the Iraq-U.S. alliance and combined exercise fundamentally defensive purpose, but North Korea's nuclear missile threat is offensive purpose. So North Korea should give up their nuclear and missile capability and should start any kind of negotiation table for denuclearization. But anyway, North Korea is very nervous at the situation, even 70 years after the end of the Korean War. So North Korea's blame is for themselves.
Right, I see. So North Korea is feeling nervous because of the RK, US, and even Japan alliance stronger than ever. Now, Dr. Berry, because of this view, North Korea itself said it will continue to bolster its self-defensive capabilities, and one U.S. intelligence report confirmed the regime is willing to use its nuclear weapons to coerce political concessions. Now, what were the details of the report and how do you see this?
Throughout the decades, the intelligence community has issued national intelligence estimates, NIEs. This one, which is titled North Korea Scenarios for Leveraging Nuclear Weapons Through 2030, which is the next 7 years, was actually issued in January. And what was released to the public last week looked like a Freedom of Information Act request, which private organizations request of the U.S. government. The reason is because most of the pages were not there. Even on the cover, there were deleted or redacted words or sentences, and there were only 2 really intact pages in the document. One of them a chart, and indeed it reads what we could read as public citizens as a very, how shall I say, very reasonable estimate that the military use of nuclear weapons is considered quite unlikely, but as we used to say in the 1990s, before North Korea had a functional nuclear weapons program and testing the nuclear weapons, we used to say that their infant nuclear program was a mischief factor in foreign policy, particularly in the region. So I think the coercive aspect of nuclear weapons possession on North Korea's part is just simply an extension of that mischief factor. But nonetheless, this report should not be misconstrued as anything other than the consensus opinion of the U.S. intelligence community, and it does not reflect the view of the White House, does not reflect the view of the State Department. It's just simply an analysis of North Korea's capabilities and intentions as of 2023.
All right, I see your point. Now, Professor Kim, Pyongyang seems to be preparing for a military parade scheduled for July 27th to mark the 70th anniversary of the Korean Armistice Agreement. Now, what do you expect to see, given that we were able to see, latest weaponry during the military parade?
Yes, Kim Jong-un always make the argument he has two main purposes for North Korean people. The first thing is economic development for North Korean people's well-being life, and second thing is military power as a sovereignty state. So he now is failed clearly about the economic development. So he have to show something is about the strong state as a military power state, including military parade. So North Korea will doing something, including military parade or even missile test, because of Kim Jong-un always consider its domestic audience. So now is the time to show Kim Jong-un as a strong leader, including military power to their domestic audience. So military parade will be a natural choice for North Korea this time.
All right, I see. So North Korea will either do the military parade or launch another missile. Now, Dr. Barry, moving on to life for people in North Korea. Currently, the Korean peninsula is under the effects of the seasonal monsoon, and North Korea's 노동신문 urged people to be thoroughly prepared. I'd like to know how much damage does North Korea usually see during this monsoon season?
I think it's the monsoons, which are actually the opening act, and then you have the typhoons that oftentimes hit either northern or southern Korea. And the typhoons are really the final act that do utter devastation. And I think one of the reasons that aggravates the situation for North Korea is that after the Korean War, where the North had experienced far more devastation of its landscape than even the southern part, they haven't done much reforestation. So when the rain comes, the ground can't absorb it. You don't have the roots of the grass and trees as much to absorb the water. And you have an increased flooding risk in North Korea. And when you combine that with the ongoing annual food shortages, which are supposedly worse than they have been in a long time this year, then you have a potential recipe for disaster. But I don't necessarily think we'll see that culminating in the month of July. I think we'll see the net effect of the problems sometime in August, particularly if one or more typhoons happens to hit North Korea.
Oh, I see. It's interesting to hear that not having done the reforestation has worsened the effect of the monsoon. But Dr. Barry, one more question. The reason, as you have already pointed out, this heavy downpours is a serious issue is because it affects grain production, right? And given that many reports are pointing to how severe the food shortage issue is in North Korea, this year's monsoon, as you have said, though it is going to come in August or I don't know at that time, is much more concerning. Now, how severe are food shortages in the North right now?
The reports are mostly anecdotal, and I don't discount them, but it's a funny thing because when the famine of '96 happened, my NGO in Washington was contacted by senior levels of North Korea to ask particularly European capitals to provide food assistance. And this was in late 1995. And my senior colleague went around to embassies in Paris, and they were quite alarmed, but they wanted to do their own checking, and so they called up several nations in the Northeast Asian area, and none of those nations would corroborate what our NGO was conveying from North Korea. So my point is that it took an actual inspection by the United Nations World Food Program to assess the food shortages at that time, and only then did the world community begin to dive in and contribute funds to mostly to the UN World Food Program, but also through other private NGOs. So you fast forward to today, and you have donor fatigue. And particularly for American NGOs, good luck getting a special passport from the State Department to enter North Korea and even provide any assistance. And of course, on top of all that, you can't even get in from most other countries because the COVID restrictions are still there. So this is a perfect storm, and I think those who are raising alarm, both inside North Korea and outside North Korea, it's very legitimate, and we could see an issue where the food shortages rival those of the mid-1990s. So it is very concerning, and unfortunately, I don't think we're going to see a lot of action from the United States or its major European allies.
Right, I see. Very concerning indeed. Now, Professor Kim, that being said, how is Pyongyang trying to tackle this food shortage, and how are people surviving?
Yes, already Dr. Berry said this is a very difficult situation, especially about the sanction effect as well. So North Korea will do something, but the problem is that North Korea has not very good capability to develop their farming system, and also they have a lot of their people, especially living in countryside, suffer from the food shortage. So North Korea will not anyway receive any kind of food support from South Korea, Japan, or the U.S., even United Nations, NGO, because of political reason. So only option is now is about the Chinese support, whether North Korea love or not, because of the China is only the main trading partner to North Korea, and China particularly enjoy this kind of influence over the North Korea, especially after the failed Hanoi summit. So sanction effects are limited, but anyway, sanction effects, they are very influential over the North Korean suffering from the food shortage, and China and Russia will never join any kind of U.S.-led sanction, especially at the United Nations. So North Korea will use this situation, and China also will use this situation. So North Korea will receive any kind of food support from China first, and not receiving any kind of support from South Korea and the U.S.
Right, I see. We'll have to see what kind of support China gives to North Korea, and I hope to see nobody should have to die because of the starvation. Now, shifting gears to international politics here, Professor Kim, recently during talks between the U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Chinese President Xi Jinping, Washington urged China to press Pyongyang to engage in dialogue, saying it is in a unique position. Now, could you elaborate more on how China is in a unique position, and what are China's thoughts on the North?
Yes, State Secretary Blinken visit to China, and he emphasized on the Chinese role, especially the pressure on North Korea to join a negotiation table for denuclearization. Yes, that is true. China says have a special position over the North Korea, not just because of the bloody brotherhood, because of the Korean War experience, but also at the same time, China is the only trading partner to North Korea, especially since the end of Cold War, because of Soviet Union to stop support to North Korea, and now it's more than 98% of total trading, including export and import between North Korea and China, is not surprising. So China is only alliance to North Korea in this way, and without Chinese support and trade, North Korea would have not survived. So State Secretary Blinken emphasized this kind of China's unique position to North Korea. So, but the problem is, unfortunately, China will use North Korea continuously as a buffer zone in minimizing U.S. influence over the region. So that is a problem. But anyway, we need to contact with China to pressure North Korea in joining negotiation table again for denuclearization. And North Korean people need food support from not just China, but from the U.S., United Nations, and international community.
Right, I see. So we'll have to see what China can do to bring North Korea back to the negotiating table. Now, Dr. Berry, in response to this, North Korea slammed Washington, saying its counteraction measures will be expanded more overwhelmingly and offensively in the case the U.S. escalates provocations and tensions. How is this reclusive regime feeling about Washington requesting Beijing to intervene to push North Korea into talks?
This has been a standard posture of the United States, saying that China has some imaginable influence over North Korea. And it maybe had more validity back in the days, in the late 1990s, of the four-party talks that included China, the six-party talks of the early 2000s that were hosted by China. And China was not quite the strong and hegemonic power in Northeast Asia that it is today. So the problem is that when Secretary Blinken visits China, it's a standard request, but it's much like any American president telling any Israeli prime minister to advocate a two-state solution. And some of the Israeli prime ministers would take it more seriously than others, and these days not so much. So it's the same thing with China. It's a pro forma request. It doesn't mean very much, and I should point out, to amplify Dr. Kim's point, that the relationship between North Korea and China, and also with Russia, is one where Russia and China are extractive, particularly of mineral resources, and North Korea is, you might say that they're extortionate. That their requests are done barely with a smile on the face, but mostly done with extortionate intent. And that's the actual character of the relations, which are actually not so much government to government, but are party to party. That's really where the most meaningful interactions take place.
Right, I see. So it was rather a standard request. Now, Dr. Berry, since you brought up the Russia and the relationship between Russia and North Korea, I'd like to also tap on the recent coup by the Wagner mercenary group. North Korea, during the mutiny, it strongly supported the Russian leadership. What would this coup have meant for North Korea amid its strengthened ties with Russia right now?
These, without exaggerating, because I know it's very easy to exaggerate in 24-hour, 24/7 news cycles, and so many writers are saying that is this the beginning of the end for Putin and all that. And I'm not trying to speak in that same kind of vein, but I am saying that, for example, for President Xi, many analysts have been saying for quite some time that every morning he wakes up hoping and trying to figure out a way to for China to avoid the fate of the Soviet Union under Gorbachev. And one might add to it today that maybe President Xi can't even sleep well at night, particularly after last week's incident. And if you're North Korea, you've got tremendous threats domestically, as we just spoke about the food shortages and so forth. But now the two people who have his back, supposedly, their systems, particularly Russia, which helped with the founding of North Korea, is now, obviously there was a mutiny that was going on. There's evidence even in the New York Times reporting this morning that one of the senior generals was quite aware of what Prigozhin was doing and was sympathetic to him. So if you're Kim Jong-un, and with all the domestic problems and who knows what political challenges might be going on behind the scenes, particularly within his own larger family, but when you deal with a situation where one of your main benefactors is not sure of his state stability, of his regime stability, the thing that you worry about most is for your own people not to get any ideas. But unfortunately, he has no control over that. So to me, this is extremely alarming, and you know, I encourage people to look broadly at what's going on in the world and not just focus on the small picture within given geographical areas. What happens around the world has an enormous impact, particularly on smaller countries that are weak and dependent. And I think North Korea has probably never been as alarmed at this. It was quite one thing to see Deng Xiaoping undergo the changes that he made in China. It was a whole other thing when Gorbachev pulled its economic support in September of 1990 from North Korea. And now what's going on with Putin is actually extremely worrying to Kim Jong-un and may, in fact, inform most of his policies in the days and weeks and months to come.
Right, so it could have been very much alarming for North Korea. Now, Professor Kim, this will be, I believe, the last question that I ask you. Though it was all over within 24 hours, this mutiny not only left the Russian leader looking weaker, but as our Dr. Berry pointed out, all authoritarian regions, including North Korea and China. Now, would there be changes in the alignment of the three countries if something similar were to happen again?
Yeah, definitely. The Dr. Berry pointed out this, I agree, the failed coup will anyway impact on the Russian status, especially Putin's position. So if a similar event happen in Russia or China or North Korea, authoritarian regime will support each other as the like-minded country because they become one, not just against the U.S., but they have a similar government system. The problem, and the interesting thing is North Korea has a little bit different situation because North Korea has a very strong upper middle class, especially living in Pyongyang. They have a strong interaction, benefit from the Kim's regime. That's why Kim Jong-un now is leadership is very certainly the very stable status rather than outsider expectation. But anyway, if a similar event happens, the China, Russia, North Korea will support definitely with a very strong position.
All right, I see. Now, unfortunately, this is all the time we have for today's edition, but thank you, Professor Kim and Dr. Berry, for your insights. We really appreciate it.
Very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, that's all for Within the Frame tonight. We'll be back tomorrow with more in-depth stories. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.